All right, so I started a roll sheet over there. If you would please print on it, that would be helpful so that I can read your name when I'm going through and entering it into the spreadsheet in Excel. I intended to print one off, and I did print one off, and I forgot it in the chaos that is in my morning. So I am going to have to cut class short today. I know that is probably going to be very hard for you today, and you're going to be sad about that. So if you feel cheated, please don't go down to the dean's office and complain and say, Dr. Aguirre didn't give me my full 75 minutes worth. You just let me know, and we'll stay late on Tuesday. How's that? We'll just, there's nobody in this classroom after us, so on Tuesday we'll just continue on for another, however long it is. But I have a meeting with the senior legal counsel that I can't get out of, and so I have to leave at 1, and I apologize in advance for that. We had some really good discussions, and I am working on getting those discussions graded from your critical thinking challenges. On Tuesday, I'll get those up as quickly as I can. I did manage to get the video up from Tuesday already on YouTube, and it's posted to D2L for those of you who watch the video or want the video. So we started talking about basically this overview of the differences between business-to-business organizational buying behavior and consumers. And there are, of course, 3 broad categories. In the critical thinking challenge, I asked you to discuss an example of each one, whether or not they were more or less rational in each of these categories. So there's for-profits, and that's mostly what we're going to look at in this class. Because although marketing is a pervasive social activity, we are primarily concerned with it as a business activity because we're in the College of Business. So we're primarily going to be concerned with for-profits, but also nonprofits and governmental entities, and we'll talk a little bit about each of those 3 categories. With regard to for-profits, we can further divide the market into industrial markets, and there are these are things that you might want to know for the exam, these fun little facts, like there are 7.7 million entities in the industrial markets. Industrial consumers produce or reprocess a good or service for sale. In the United States, 75% of these are now service firms. So they're selling insurance, legal, communications, things like AT&T, providing cell phones for businesses, or providing cell phones to businesses that sell to consumers. How many of you bought your AT&T iPhone from an authorized, one that says authorized retailer? Okay, so you bought it from an independent retailer who's established a relationship with AT&T and they sell. If you bought directly from a company store, then you bought directly from AT&T. 25% sell primarily physical goods. Now when we talk about global marketing, which we'll talk about on Tuesday, it's going to be exactly the opposite. 25% of the firms in the global market actually produce tangible goods, things that you can touch, like this camera case, the camera back there, this computer monitor. And 75% produce these tangible goods and 25% are engaged in services. Why is that? Because if we look at the world economy as a whole, the United States is a post-industrial society, really. We're a services-based society, but the rest of the world, particularly those really industrialized countries, or what we used to refer to in economic development as the third world, are still producing what? They're largely producing the goods and things that we all need to wear and touch. The value in our economy has shifted from being a producer of those tangibles to producers of intangibles, but the rest of the world is still largely producing tangible stuff. There are resellers. So there are 1.5 million retailers. So in the reseller market, we can actually break this down into 2 types. We can classify it as consumer retailers or resellers, and then wholesalers or middlemen, and we'll talk about the middlemen when we talk about logistics and transportation. So there are 435,000 wholesalers. They sell largely in bulk. They don't actually do much processing to the product. So what does a wholesaler do? They might break it down. They'll buy huge crates or cartons of stuff, and then they'll break it down into individual packages to sell to the retail stores who then sell individual units. Think about Sam's. How many of you have a Sam's membership? How many of you actually buy a lot of stuff at Sam's? you have to buy a lot more of it in bulk, right? Most of the time, if you want a Reese's peanut butter cup, you don't want an entire case. You want what? Like 1 unit of it. At the governmental level, we have 3. We can break governments down in the United States into 3 levels. Now, from a constitutional standpoint, there are only 2 levels. We have a federal system, and so there are only 2 levels from a constitutional standpoint. But from a practical standpoint, there are 3 levels. There's the federal government, there are state governments, and then there are sub-entities which are arms of the state or authorized and organized under the laws of the state that are local. And these include not just municipalities and school districts, they also include things like rural fire districts that need to buy products and services, things like fire trucks and hoses and all of that good stuff. Rural water districts, special entity districts that exist, and so we have 3 levels. And there are about a total of 89,500 entities. Now, if you can get listed as an authorized distributor or seller to these governments, that's a good place to be because those contracts are usually long-term. You have the opportunity to establish long-term relationships with them, and they can be very profitable. The way we measure this, domestic and global, industrial, reseller, and governmental markets, in the United States and in North America, we have the North American Industrial Classification System, the NAICS. And that's between the 3 partners of NAFTA, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And it measures economic activity among various sectors of the economy in these 3. And they provide studies of things like market share, the demand for goods and services, and the import competition in these areas. So it's a useful source of information for those people that want to go into business-to-business marketing. And there are always a number of questions on the second exam regarding the NAICS and what the digits mean in terms of the code that we'll look at. So there's a 6-digit code. The first 2 digits represent a sector of the economy, for example, agriculture, mining, or construction. So in the example, construction is listed as 23 in the first 2 digits. The third digit is the subsector. So for example, it could be construction of buildings or civil engineering. So if you had commercial construction, the code would read 23.6. The 4th would be an industry group like residential buildings. So you could have construction of buildings and residential buildings 1. The 5th designates a specific industry. And the 6th is country level national industries. For example, single family resident housing versus multi-family residential housing would be the 6th digit. And it allows for us to measure and determine growth in these various subsectors. So if you're, for example, selling, let's say, wood, lumber, and you look at this, you might want to look at which sectors of the economy are growing, which nations have the most growth, and then use that when we talk about segmenting, targeting, and positioning to develop business plans. There is one limitation to studies that are produced under this. The 5 digits are not available for all countries if too few organizations exist in that 5th digit code. So for example, in Mexico this might be the case because there are too few organizations that exist. If you look at something like cell phones, who's one of the richest men in the world from Mexico? Anybody want to take a guess at this? Huh? Carlos Slim. What's your... See me right after class, so I'll give you bonus points for coming up with that. Brilliant. Carlos Slim, he owns, if you want to buy cell phones in Mexico, basically there's one person. He has a monopoly on the cell phone. So there wouldn't be data because there's only one provider. Whereas in the United States and Canada, how many providers do you have? Actually, I don't know about Canada, I know about Mexico. But how many providers do you have in the United States? A lot. You have at least T-Mobile, AT&T, US Cellular, Sprint, what else? Verizon. You have at least more ability to look at, but in Mexico they only have one. The what?
The numbers.
Any examples of age? I'm sorry. I'm guessing not understanding. So if you look at construction, is the first two is the sector of the economy would be 23. So if you were looking at, if you go down to the bottom, you're looking at residential housing, the numbers would be 23, 6, 1, 1, 5. That's how the number, that's how the code would come up. If you wanted to, if you were looking for single family residential units, if you wanted to, for example, sell to developers of homes, developers generally fall into two types. Mostly in Oklahoma, most residential developers are what? Of family residences build what? Single family units. Why? Because that's what people want in Oklahoma. Most people want to buy a house, whereas if you went to New York, the vast majority of developers like Donald Trump, even though they're building for residences, are going to be building what? Multi-family units, like big apartment or co-op buildings, things like that. And so if you looked at the Trump construction company in terms of family residential housing, it would be 23, 6, 1, 1, 6 as the code that you would look at for the classification. Characteristics of business to business. Now this is the reason, the number one characteristic up here is the biggest reason that it's the easy argument to make is that organizations are more rational in their buying than individuals. Nobody needs a Rolex watch, do they? The desire to have a Rolex is probably a priori irrational. Does anybody need a Rolex? What's the base model of Rolex start at right now? It goes up, by the way, 10%. Rolex goes up 10% every year, year over year. It's a little high. That's the mid-level, starts at about 6. You can get an Air King, which is the just basic Rolex without the date and stainless steel for about $3,000. The two-tones with the date start at about 15, and the presidentials, which are the all gold with the day and date, start at $23,000. Now let's take the base model of Rolex, the Air King, the stainless steel, no date. Anybody really need a $2,000 watch? Huh? In fact, do you really need a watch at all? One of the things that's interesting to me is, one of the things that we know about your generation is that you all don't wear watches for the most part. Why is that? Why the hell would you wear a watch? You have your phone. Why would you wear a watch? You don't need a watch. You got it on your phone. Right? It's a superfluous item that you don't need. So you really don't need a watch, let alone a Rolex. So it may be a priori irrational to want a Rolex and to go out and buy a Rolex. Businesses don't operate that way. They don't buy things because they want them for themselves, because they have this irrational want or desire. They buy them because they want to sell it or reproduce it into something else that they can sell to what? Their customers. Or if they're a nonprofit, to their constituents that they try to provide services for, or if they're a government. We buy all kinds of things here at UCO. Why do we buy them? Do we want that projector that's up there for our own use? Does the institution just put up projectors so that the faculty and staff can get together and we can have movie parties? No. Why do we want that? Why do we buy that projector? We buy it so that we can deliver a service to you, which is education. And so the demand is derived. And that's the number one reason that you might make the argument that organizations are more rational, because they're not buying it for themselves. They have to have constituents in order to be able to support them. And so the derived demand is the one thing that may make businesses more rational in their buying. They're not buying stuff because they want it themselves, out of some irrational desire. They want to be able to satisfy the needs and wants of their constituency. The purchasing is typically much larger. If you're going to buy one of these projectors because you want to have a big screen in your home, project the football game, you're going to buy what? How many of them? One. How many do we buy every year? We replace about 10% of the projectors on campus every year. How many is that? It's hundreds of projectors that we buy every year. We buy lots of monitors, lots of CPUs for things. So we're not just buying one. So the size is typically larger. The number of people buying, though, if you want to be a seller of products to higher education in Oklahoma, how many schools are there? Well, there's about 3.5 million people in the state of Oklahoma, but how many higher education institutions are there? What? Well, there's more than 3. You know, but basically at the state level, you have the 2 big ones, OU and OSU. Then you have the regional universities, of which UCO is a part. So you've got Northwestern, Southwestern, East Central. You know, you've got like a handful of schools. You have maybe a total, if you took the non-for-profits, things like Oklahoma Christian down on Memorial Road and Oklahoma City University, and the for-profits, which would be things like the University of Phoenix and Capella, you maybe have 50 entities in the entire state. So there's a lot fewer of them. The buying objectives are not to satisfy maybe some individual want, but generally the things that they're going to look for are, if you want to sell to for-profits, they're going to want to do what? They're going to want to increase their profits. We're not interested in the business, although we really are becoming far more interested in increasing our profitability. We've become much more on a profit model. When I went to school in Oklahoma as an undergraduate, the school paid for 80% of the cost of my education, and I paid for about 20% of it, going to OU, and my brother went to OSU. You now pay for 80% of the cost of your education, and the state picks up about 20%. In Colorado, students pay about 90% of the cost of their education, and the state picks up about 10%. And I can tell you that the trend is to do what? You think the state's going to pick up any more next year than they did this year? Or the year after that? The trend is going to be to what? The trend is going to be to go to a bigger profit model, even in public institutions of higher education. And so our goal is not necessarily to increase profits, although that's becoming our goal, but we certainly want to do what? When we buy these things, we want to do what? We want to make sure we get the best what? The best bang for the buck. We want to reduce costs on these. We want to reduce our costs. So we do things like we buy in bulk. We get contracts that allow us to buy at the state. So we not only buy our stuff generally for the university, we take advantage of the state contract. So it's no longer just UCO buying these Panasonic things. We're actually putting together with a pool of all of the state agencies that want to buy this stuff. So if you look at all of the state agencies and all of the schools, it's a voluminous amount of activity that they're selling to. The buying criteria for businesses, they're going to be much more price sensitive because they're going to want to what? Increase revenue or increase profits, and so price is going to be much more of a factor than it is to consumers. How price sensitive are you, for example, in the convenience goods that you purchase? So what's a convenient good that you purchase? Things like the Pepsi Cola or the Coca-Cola that you buy in the vending machine. If it goes up a lot, are you going to not buy it? What's the standard? What do we charge for a 20-ounce bottle of Coke here? $1.50. We're actually pretty cheap. I went to a school the other day for a conference. I was down at OCCC, and they have communist Pepsi products, not red-blooded American Coca-Cola products in their vending machines, and they charge $2.50 for a bottle, a 20-ounce bottle of horrible stuff. Not red-blooded American soft drinks. It's commie products like Pepsi. Did I pay the $2.50? Yeah. didn't bat an eye at paying, that's $1 more than we charge here at UCO, you know, but I'm not that price sensitive, at least with regard to that. Businesses, on the other hand, if you're talking about selling thousands of units, even a 3% difference can make a huge difference in what? Your profitability or your profit margin. Quality specifications are going to be more important, particularly in the industrial market, where they're going to want stuff. So if you're selling, for example, in an industrial market to builders of commercial properties in Florida, what kinds of specifications after the hurricanes that went through, what kinds of specifications are they going to be looking for in building materials? That's going to be important to them. What? Yeah, that they're wind rated, that they're rated for certain load capacities and hurricane tested materials. Sort of like if you're looking at in Oklahoma tornado shelters, the specifications are going to be that it's what? That it can withstand a what? An F5 tornado. Delivery schedules are far more important in the business-to-business world. You will oftentimes have time of the essence clauses in your contracts that say that if they don't meet delivery schedules, that the supplier pays a penalty. Because the idea is that if I need your product, if I need widgets to manufacture my Ford automobile, and I don't get the widgets, it's going to decrease my ability to be profitable and get product out to consumers. Environmental issues are also important in this concern, as they're heavily regulated by not industries, but by entities like the EPA. And just-in-time inventory control is going to be one of those things that they look at. Technical capabilities are going to be important, more so in the business-to-business market than it is in the business-to-consumer market. Why is that? Well, we're going to have to make sure that it's compatible. And the example I give you here is UCO's D2L. When we went from using Blackboard, we had WebCT, to D2L, which is a horrible learning management system. It's a horrible system, by the way, horrible. What did we need? Well, we had lots of technical specifications that we needed. We needed to be able to show that supplier of the LMS that we purchased would do what? Well, that it would work on all kinds of platforms. Now, that it would work on things like what? How many of you have a Mac? That it would work on Macs, that it would work on our Windows-based boxes, things like that. Warranties become really important in business to business, and that's covered under the UCC. Some of you will have to take a course called the Law of Commercial Transactions, which I used to teach, and we talk a lot about warranties and their importance in business to business relationships. Past performance, course of dealing is going to be more characteristic in the business to business context. Relationships are usually long-term and they're established through this course of dealing. Whereas, for example, with regard to you, are you terribly brand loyal to a lot of stuff? Or do you shop around? Are you terribly loyal to Walmart? Or if you can get a better deal at Amazon, are you going to buy it from Amazon? You're going to buy it from Amazon. You're not terribly brand loyal. But in business to business, the course of dealing may be more important because you know a supplier, you know that they have the capability of getting things to you in time. And so course of dealing and past performance become important, and then production facilities and their capacity to meet your demands. The relationships in business to business, in the business to business context, are usually very long-term. They usually involve long-term partnerships. The buying is highly formalized. Generally speaking, businesses use buying centers. For example, at UCO, we have a formalized buying process. It results in when we decided we needed a new LMS. So what we had was we had something called WebCT, and Blackboard bought WebCT, and then Blackboard does this thing where they shut LMSs down. They did this with Angel. They bought Angel, and then they shut it down. They told schools that were using Angel, you're welcome to continue to use it. We will no longer support it. Well, what does that mean? You no longer support it. It's going to start breaking. Like when you start doing updates to your Windows, it's not going to be compatible. And what you're going to have to do, if you want to continue to use the Angel Learning Management System, is because Blackboard is not going to support it anymore, you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to get your own programmers in there to patch it and make it compatible with the updates of whatever the new Windows box comes out with. So basically what Blackboard does is they hold you hostage. They go in, they buy up a product, they strip it, and then they tell the users, we're no longer going to support that product. So what they're doing is they're getting you to buy Blackboard. Well, this upset the powers that be at UCO, as it does in a lot of places, who said, I don't want to be held hostage. We're going to buy anybody other than Blackboard. So we sent out an RFP. So when this happened, we decided we needed a new learning management system. And so we developed, through the information technology, they developed what they needed, and they sent it to the purchasing department, who then sends it out for requests for proposals. And it's a highly formalized process, and it involves a lot of the users in the process. So there were professors at UCO that had input on which learning management system we were going to buy. Influencers, people like students. We had people on the committee that were students that tested it out so we could see if it was going to work with our student population. Then we have actual formal buyers in the purchasing department who will open the bids and unseal them and specify whether or not the RFP has been met by each individual person or company that bids on it. And then ultimately, we have deciders, which is at UCO, any contract over $5,000 has to be approved. There are only 2 people. This is important. When you go and you sell products as a business-to-business salesperson, knowing who actually has the power. There are lots of people that have influence, but the only 2 people on campus that can sign a contract for more than $5,000 are who? The president of the institution and the vice president for administration. Those are the only 2 people that can sign a contract. Now, this is sort of interesting if you think about it, because who's the number 2 person on campus after the president? It's not the vice president for administration. When the president is away, the acting president is not the VP for administration. It's the provost. And the provost doesn't even have the power to sign a contract for over $5,000. So understanding these sorts of characteristics of the business-to-business context are really, really important.
One important question is that do they both have to sign?
No, just one. One or the other. There are different types of buying situations, and I am going to have to stop there for today and pick it up on Tuesday, and we'll talk about global since I've reached the time. Again, if you feel cheated on Tuesday, you let me know, and we'll stay after.